March 17, 1943. U-boat operations room, Cremer, France. The chalk squeaked against the blackboard as Kapitän-Leutnant Günther Hessler updated the tonnage calculations, his hand hesitating over numbers that defied logic. Standing before Admiral Karl Dönitz and the assembled staff officers, he wrote a figure that would have been dismissed as Allied propaganda just months earlier. The Americans launched 17 ships yesterday, 17 in one day. Through the smoke-filled operations room overlooking the submarine pens of Lorient, Dönitz studied the mathematics of defeat spreading across the chart table. Intelligence reports from agents in American ports, intercepted radio transmissions, and the testimonies of captured merchant sailors all pointed to the same impossible conclusion. The United States was building ships faster than his U-boats could sink them. Not marginally faster, overwhelmingly, crushingly faster. The commander of Germany's submarine force, architect of the tonnage war that had brought Britain to the edge of starvation, was witnessing the transformation of naval warfare through industrial mathematics. Between 1941 and 1945, 18 American shipyards would build 2,710 Liberty ships, an average of 3 ships every 2 days. What Dönitz didn't yet fully grasp was that this was merely one component of an industrial tsunami that would produce over 5,000 vessels and completely reverse the Battle of the Atlantic. The revelation unfolding in that operations room would cascade through the U-boat force like a depth charge explosion, shattering the morale of men who had believed they could strangle the Allied war effort through simple arithmetic, sinking ships faster than they could be replaced. The concept had been elegantly simple when Dönitz first presented it to Hitler in 1939. According to his calculations, a fleet of 300 medium Type 7 U-boats could sink 1 million tons of ships a month, and within a year sink enough of the approximately 3,000 British merchant ships to strangle the British economy. The mathematics were clear. Britain needed to import 47 million tons of supplies annually to survive. To win the tonnage war, the U-boat arm had to sink 300,000 GRT per month to overwhelm Britain's shipbuilding capacity. In his leather-bound war diary, Dönitz had written with characteristic precision, "The shipping of the enemy powers is one great whole. It is therefore in this connection immaterial where a ship is sunk. It must still in the final analysis be replaced by a new ship." This tonnage war philosophy reduced the complexity of naval strategy to simple subtraction. Enemy ships minus sinkings equals victory or defeat. By early 1942, the formula appeared to be working. During what U-boat crews called the Second Happy Time, operations off the American coast from January to August 1942, German submarines sank 609 ships, totaling over 3.1 million tons. Korvettenkapitän Reinhard Hardigan, commanding U-123 off New York, wrote in his war diary, "It is a pity there are not 10 U-boats here instead of 1. The hunting is magnificent. The Americans are so careless, they have learned nothing from 2 years of war." Oberleutnant Herbert Werner, serving aboard U-230, recalled the intoxicating mathematics of those months. "We calculated endlessly. Each ship averaged 5,000 tons. 6 ships meant 30,000 tons. Our flotilla of 12 boats, each sinking 6 ships per patrol, meant 360,000 tons. With 40 boats operating continuously, we could achieve victory." The initial signs that something extraordinary was happening in American shipyards came from unexpected sources. In September 1942, survivors from the torpedoed freighter West Lashaway, picked up by U-66, spoke freely during interrogation. One merchant sailor, an engine room oiler from Baltimore, mentioned casually that his ship had been built in 35 days. Kapitän-Leutnant Friedrich Markworth, commanding U-66, noted in his war diary, "The prisoner must be mistaken or lying. No nation can build a 7,000-ton vessel in 35 days. German shipyards require 6 months minimum for such construction." But similar reports kept surfacing. Survivors from the Liberty ship William Clark, sunk by U-129 in November 1942, claimed their vessel was one of 60 being built simultaneously at just one shipyard in Richmond, California. The captured second mate insisted he had personally seen 3 ships launched in a single week. At U-boat headquarters, these reports were initially dismissed as propaganda designed to demoralize German submariners. Korvettenkapitän Günther Hessler, Dönitz's son-in-law and chief of operations, wrote in a staff assessment, "The Americans are clearly instructing their merchant crews to exaggerate production figures if captured. Such construction rates are technically impossible." The truth was more staggering than any propaganda could have been. At Henry Kaiser's Richmond shipyards in California, revolutionary production methods were achieving the impossible. The SS Robert E. Peary was launched on November 12, 1942, just 4 days, 15 hours and 29 minutes after her keel was laid down. This wasn't a stunt or a one-time achievement. It was a demonstration of American industrial methodology that would transform shipbuilding forever. The key innovation was prefabrication and assembly line construction. Complete deckhouses, double bottom sections, stern frame assemblies and bow units were manufactured separately, then assembled like giant steel puzzles. Each Liberty ship required nearly 50 miles of welding, replacing the traditional riveting that required skilled craftsmen. Welders could be trained in weeks, not years. Women, teenagers and men previously considered unemployable were operating cutting torches and welding equipment. German intelligence agents in neutral Portugal managed to obtain American newspapers showing photographs of these shipyards. The images were studied intensively at U-boat headquarters. Multiple hulls stretched as far as cameras could capture, each in various stages of completion. Cranes the size of buildings moved prefabricated sections weighing hundreds of tons. The photographs showed ships at every stage simultaneously, keels being laid while others received engines and superstructures, while completed vessels steamed away from the fitting-out docks. Oberleutnant Peter Cremer, commanding U-333, would later write, "When we saw those photographs, we knew the war was lost. They were not building ships, they were manufacturing them like automobiles." By January 1943, American shipyards were achieving production rates that exceeded the worst nightmares of German naval planners. The statistics, when finally confirmed through multiple intelligence sources, were devastating. January 1943, 96 ships launched totaling 850,000 tons. February 1943, 108 ships launched totaling 975,000 tons. March 1943, 120 ships launched totaling 1,100,000 tons. By 1944, the average time to build a Liberty ship was 42 days. But this average concealed the reality that experienced yards were completing ships in less than 3 weeks while simultaneously training new workers. The United States Maritime Commission's emergency shipbuilding program hadn't just mobilized existing shipyards, it had created entirely new ones. Kapitän-Leutnant Wolfgang Lüth, one of Germany's most successful U-boat commanders with 47 ships sunk, captured the despair in a letter to his wife that survived the war. "We are told to achieve an impossible target. Yesterday I learned the Americans built 1,100,000 tons last month alone. We are not fighting a navy, we are fighting a factory." The full magnitude of American production capacity hit the U-boat force during the convoy battles of March 1943. Convoy HX-229 and SC-122, sailing in close proximity, were attacked by 40 U-boats in the largest Wolfpack operation of the war. The U-boats sank 22 ships totaling 146,000 tons, a tactical victory that should have been devastating to Allied logistics. Dönitz personally announced the success in a special communiqué, declaring it proof that the U-boat remained the decisive weapon. But within days, intelligence reports arrived that chilled the operations room. The Americans had launched 38 ships in the same week the convoy battle raged. The mathematics were inescapable. For every ship the Wolfpack sank, the Americans were building two. Korvettenkapitän Heinrich Lehmann-Willenbrock, commanding U-109, wrote in his war diary after returning from this patrol, "The ocean is full of new ships. Where we once found half-empty convoys of rusted vessels, we now see endless lines of new construction. Fresh paint, modern equipment, and flying American flags. They are overwhelming us with abundance." Even more disturbing were reports of ship types previously unknown. Beyond the standard Liberty ships, American yards were producing faster Victory ships, T-2 tankers, and specialized vessels. The variety suggested not desperation, but methodical planning and unlimited resources. German submariners who survived sunk U-boats and were rescued by Allied vessels provided the most detailed intelligence about American production capacity. Oberleutnant zur See Hans Joachim Förster, pulled from the water after U-189 was sunk by British escorts in April 1943, spent 3 weeks aboard the newly launched Liberty ship James W. Denver before reaching port. In his post-war memoir, Förster recalled, "The ship was so new that instruction manuals were still wrapped in plastic. The crew quarters had amenities we hadn't seen in years: hot showers, electric lighting throughout, refrigerated food storage. The engine room contained more advanced equipment than our newest U-boats. This was not a desperate emergency vessel, but a well-designed ship that happened to be built in 5 weeks." The American crew, confident in their nation's victory, spoke freely about production statistics. One merchant marine officer showed Förster a newspaper clipping about Kaiser's Richmond shipyards. The article, intended to boost American morale, contained production figures that Förster memorized. Between 1941 and 1945, 18 American shipyards turned out 2,751 Liberty ships, easily the largest class of ships ever built. In May 1943, German naval intelligence achieved what they considered a major coup, obtaining through Spanish sources a complete copy of the United States Maritime Commission's annual report. The document, intended for Congress, laid out American shipbuilding achievements and projections in exhaustive detail. Reading the report at his headquarters, Dönitz reportedly sat in silence for a full hour. The numbers were beyond comprehension. American shipyards had launched 4,915 merchant ships totaling 36,960,592 tons during the war years, nearly 4 times the pre-war American merchant marine. The report projected that 1944 production would exceed 1943 targets. The document revealed that 250,000 individual parts were prefabricated throughout the country in 250-ton sections and welded together in about 70 days. One section boasted that American shipyards employed over 700,000 workers, including 200,000 women. German shipyards, by comparison, employed fewer than 80,000 workers total, most of them increasingly reluctant forced labourers. Fregattenkapitän Eberhard Gott, Dönitz's chief of staff, performed the grim calculations. At current production rates, even if U-boats sank every single ship in a large convoy, an impossible feat, the Americans would replace the entire tonnage in 11 days. Beyond mere numbers, U-boat commanders were increasingly reporting technological advantages in American shipping that made their task even more difficult. New Liberty ships were equipped with advanced navigation equipment, improved damage control systems, and defensive armament that exceeded many destroyer escorts from just 2 years earlier. Captain Lieutenant Herbert Schulze, commanding U-437, noted after a failed attack in June 1943. Target vessel performed evasive maneuvers suggesting radar detection of periscope. New construction Liberty ship demonstrated speed exceeding our intelligence estimates. Defensive armament included radar-directed guns that achieved near misses on our first emergency dive. The technology gap extended to construction methods themselves. While German shipyards still relied heavily on riveting, American yards had perfected welding techniques that not only sped construction but produced stronger hulls. Welding saved steel, reduced construction time by 30%, and could be performed by workers trained in just 2 weeks. German attempts to accelerate their own shipbuilding failed catastrophically. The few cargo vessels Germany managed to build took an average of 8 months to complete. When pressure was applied to speed construction, quality suffered so severely that several ships literally broke apart during trials. The psychological impact on U-boat crews was devastating. Men who had sailed in 1940 and 1941, when single submarines could sink entire convoys, now faced overwhelming opposition. Where once they had been hunters, they were now the hunted. Maschinengefreiter Johann Müller, a diesel mechanic on U-758, kept an illegal diary that survived the war. His entry for July 1943 reads, "The old hands speak of when we were winning, when ships burned from horizon to horizon. Now we count ourselves lucky to survive each patrol. We hear the Americans build ships faster than we can reload our torpedo tubes. What is the point of our sacrifice?" The statistics backed up this despair. After December 1941, when the US joined, the tonnage target effectively doubled to 700,000 GRT per month. This target was achieved in only 1 month, November 1942, while after May 1943 average sinkings dropped to less than 1/10 of that figure. The hunters had become the hunted, and the mathematics of the tonnage war had reversed with stunning finality. U-boat morale, already strained by mounting losses, cracked under the weight of these revelations. Crew members began referring to their submarines as iron coffins, a term that would have resulted in severe punishment just a year earlier, but was now so common that officers ignored it. Faced with irrefutable evidence of American production supremacy, Dönitz attempted desperate measures to maintain the tonnage war. In a conference with Hitler on May 31, 1943, he argued for increased U-boat production, requesting a minimum of 40 new submarines per month. Hitler, increasingly detached from reality, approved the request but allocated no additional resources. Dönitz also ordered changes in tactical doctrine. U-boats were instructed to prioritize loaded ships over those in ballast, tankers over dry cargo vessels, and newer construction that would be harder to replace. But these refinements were meaningless against the tsunami of American production. In his war diary entry for June 1943, Dönitz wrote with uncharacteristic emotion, "The enemy production figures are confirmed from multiple sources. We face not a fleet, but an industry. Each patrol now costs us submarines we cannot replace, while the enemy launches multiple ships daily. The tonnage war's arithmetic has become our death sentence." At the heart of American shipbuilding success was Henry Kaiser, an industrialist who had never built a ship before 1940. His methods, refined from construction projects like the Hoover Dam, revolutionized shipbuilding forever. German intelligence collected extensive files on Kaiser, trying to understand how one man's methods could tip the balance of the Battle of the Atlantic. Kaiser's innovations were deceptively simple but revolutionary in application. He instituted modular construction and assembly techniques where ship sections were welded together instead of riveted. Assembly lines, women workers, and 3-shift continuous operations transformed shipyards into factories. German naval architects studying captured documentation were astounded by Kaiser's production metrics. His Richmond shipyards alone employed 90,000 workers at peak production. Prefabrication meant that while one ship was being assembled, components for 5 others were under construction simultaneously. The yard operated like an automobile factory, with ships moving through assembly stations. Konteradmiral Werner Fuchs, head of German naval construction, reported to Dönitz, "Kaiser has industrialized shipbuilding in ways we never imagined. Our yards are artisan workshops. Theirs are factories. We build ships, they manufacture them. The difference is not of degree, but of kind." The Liberty ship itself became a symbol of American industrial might that haunted U-boat crews. Based on a simple British design from 1879, these vessels were deliberately basic. slow, unglamorous, but capable of carrying 10,000 tons of cargo. A single Liberty ship could carry 2,840 jeeps, 440 light tanks, or 260 medium tanks, or 230 million rounds of rifle ammunition. What terrified German naval planners wasn't the sophistication of Liberty ships, but their sheer numbers and replaceability. When U-515 under Werner Henke sank the Liberty ship Thomas McKean in June 1942, American shipyards launched 3 identical vessels the same week. The individual ship meant nothing. The production system meant everything. Captured German naval officers were often shown American propaganda films featuring Liberty ship construction. One film, which showed the complete assembly of a vessel in time-lapse photography, reduced a group of veteran U-boat officers to stunned silence. Kapitänleutnant Hans Jenisch later recalled, "We watched them build an entire ship in what seemed like minutes. The film was propaganda, yes, but the ships were real. We saw them every day through our periscopes, new paint, new flags, heading for Britain." American mass production methods created unexpected advantages beyond mere numbers. Standardization meant that repair parts were interchangeable between hundreds of vessels. A damaged Liberty ship could be repaired in any Allied port with standard components. German vessels, often custom-built or modified, required specific parts that might take months to manufacture. The production system also enabled rapid technological advancement. When U-boats began achieving success with acoustic torpedoes in late 1943, the Americans retrofitted hundreds of Liberty ships with noise-making devices in a matter of weeks. German attempts to counter Allied radar took years to implement across their smaller U-boat fleet. Oberleutnant zur See Heinz Schäfer, who would later command U-977 on its famous surrender voyage to Argentina, observed, "The Americans learned from every sinking, and their corrections were implemented across hundreds of ships simultaneously. We learned too, but our lessons were applied to individual boats, slowly, painfully. They were fighting an industrial war. We were fighting an artisanal one." By autumn 1943, the mathematics of defeat were undeniable. Intelligence reports confirmed that American shipyards had achieved a production rate of over 1.5 million tons per month. The United States and Canada began building ships faster than they could be sunk in September 1942, when 713,204 tons of new merchant shipping was delivered, while 500,881 tons was lost. The gap had only widened since. At a conference of U-boat flotilla commanders in October 1943, Dönitz presented the figures that sealed their fate. On a blackboard in the operations room, he wrote 3 columns: ships sunk, October 1943. 29 vessels, 156,000 tons, ships built, October 1943. 140 vessels, 1,200,000 tons. Net enemy gain, 111 vessels, 1,044,000 tons. The room fell silent. Finally, Korvettenkapitän Werner Winter, commander of the first flotilla, spoke. "Herr Admiral, at these rates, even if we sink nothing, the enemy gains strength. We are not slowing their growth, merely providing their shipyards with practice." Dönitz's response, recorded by his aide, was revealing. "Gentlemen, we continue not because we can win the tonnage war, but because our duty demands it. Each ship sunk, however briefly, delays supplies to our enemies. We have lost the mathematics, but not our honour." For ordinary U-boat crew members, the revelation of American production capacity came through accumulated observations rather than statistics. Bootsmart Wilhelm Hoffmann, a torpedo mechanic on U-604, kept a secret diary that captured the gradual realization. March 1942. Sank old Greek tramp steamer. Rust bucket held together with paint. These are the ships starving England. September 1942. New American freighter in convoy. Fresh paint, modern lines. Where did this come from? March 1943. Every ship in convoy appears new, identical profiles, like they're stamping them from moulds. July 1943. Oberbootsman says Americans build 3 ships for every one we sink. If true, why do we sail? October 1943. Witnessed 17 ships in convoy, all flying American flags, all new construction. We managed to damage one. What is the point? German efforts to understand and counter American shipbuilding capacity led to an intensive intelligence operation. Agents in neutral countries purchased American newspapers and magazines. Technical journals were smuggled through Spain and Sweden. Every captured merchant sailor was intensively interrogated about shipyard locations, construction methods, and production rates. The intelligence painted an ever more daunting picture. Beyond the Liberty ships, Americans were building Victory ships, faster and more sophisticated than Liberties. T2 tankers, capable of carrying 141,000 barrels of oil. C1, C2, and C3 cargo vessels, specialized for specific routes and cargoes. Hundreds of escort carriers and destroyer escorts. Hauptmann Ernst Köhler, a naval intelligence officer, compiled a comprehensive report in December 1943 that concluded, American shipbuilding capacity exceeds our entire pre-war estimate of their total industrial potential. They are building more ships annually than existed in the entire world merchant fleet in 1939. After Germany's surrender, captured U-boat commanders provided extensive testimony about their recognition of American industrial supremacy. Their accounts, preserved in Allied interrogation records, reveal the psychological journey from confidence through doubt to despair. Fregattenkapitän Fritz Julius Lemp, who had commanded U-30 at the war's start, stated, In 1940, we believed 20 U-boats could strangle Britain. By 1943, we had 200 operational boats and were losing the Atlantic. The Americans didn't defeat our submarines. They buried them under an avalanche of steel. Kapitänleutnant Heinrich Müller-Edzards, captured when U-590 was sunk in July 1943, was more specific. I attended a briefing where we were shown American production figures. The staff officer presenting them actually apologized, saying he knew they seemed impossible but they were confirmed by multiple sources. I thought of those numbers every time I raised my periscope and saw another convoy of new ships. The ultimate statistics of the tonnage war revealed the totality of German defeat. By the end of the war, although the U-boat arm had sunk 6,000 ships totaling 21 million GRT, the Allies had built over 38 million tons of new shipping. The net gain of 17 million tons meant the Allies ended the war with a larger merchant fleet than they had possessed at its start. For Dönitz and his staff, these numbers represented not just military defeat, but conceptual failure. The tonnage war theory had assumed finite resources and limited production capacity. It had never accounted for an enemy capable of transforming their entire industrial base into a shipbuilding machine. In his final war diary entry before Germany's surrender, Dönitz wrote, "We fought the last war with weapons designed for the next-to-last war. The Americans fought with factories. In the end, their Liberty ships proved mightier than our U-boats, not because they were better ships, but because there were always more of them. We sank ships. They built fleets." In August 1945, while imprisoned at Mondorf-les-Bains, Dönitz had extensive conversations with other captured German leaders. In a recorded conversation with General Feldmarschall Wilhelm Keitel, Dönitz made a remarkable admission. I knew by spring of 1943 that the tonnage war was lost. The Americans were building ships at rates that defied not just our capabilities but our comprehension. I had asked my staff to calculate how long it would take Germany to build 2,700 cargo ships. The answer was 150 years at our maximum production rate. The Americans did it in 4 years while simultaneously building the world's largest navy and air force. When Keitel asked why he had continued sending U-boats on increasingly suicidal missions, Dönitz's answer revealed the trap of his own making. What else could we do? Admit that our entire naval strategy was fantasy, that we had challenged an industrial giant with what amounted to naval guerrilla warfare. We continued because stopping would have meant acknowledging that we never had a chance. Ironically, American shipbuilders were often unaware of their psychological impact on the U-boat force. Workers at Kaiser's shipyards, interviewed after the war, expressed surprise that their efforts had so demoralized the enemy. Margaret Rosie Thompson, a welder at Richmond Shipyard No. 2, recalled, "We were just doing our jobs, trying to beat the other shift's production record. We'd paint slogans on the hulls like 'Built by America's Women' or 'From Richmond to Hitler with Love.' We had no idea U-boat commanders were reading those slogans through their periscopes and losing hope." Henry Kaiser himself, in a 1946 interview, admitted he hadn't fully grasped the strategic impact of his production methods. "I was thinking about efficiency, about cost per ton, about worker safety. I didn't realize until after the war that we had essentially automated victory. The Germans could never match our industrial mathematics. Every Liberty ship was proof that democracy and free enterprise could outproduce tyranny." The numbers tell the final story with brutal clarity. German U-boat force, 1,162 U-boats commissioned. 777 U-boats lost, 30,000 submariners killed, 75% casualty rate. 2,779 Allied ships sunk. American shipbuilding 2,710 Liberty ships built. 534 Victory ships built. 500 plus other cargo vessels built. Total, over 5,000 ships constructed. At peak production, American shipyards produced the entire pre-war commercial shipping tonnage in just 3 years. The mathematics that Dönitz had so carefully calculated in 1939 had been not just defeated, but obliterated. Post-war interviews with surviving U-boat commanders revealed how deeply the recognition of American industrial capacity had affected them. Many admitted that by mid-1943 they knew the war was lost, not because of military defeats, but because of production statistics. Korvettenkapitän Adalbert Schnee, one of the most decorated U-boat commanders, stated at a veterans' reunion in 1975, "We were magnificent warriors, defeated by accountants and factory workers. Every torpedo we fired cost the Reich the equivalent of building 5 houses. Every Liberty ship the Americans built cost them less than our torpedoes. We were fighting the wrong war with the wrong weapons against the wrong enemy." The psychological impact extended beyond the war. Many U-boat veterans struggled to comprehend how completely they had misunderstood American capabilities. Heinrich Lehmann-Willenbrock, the highly decorated commander of U-96 immortalized in Das Boot, later worked in merchant shipping and witnessed Liberty ships still operating efficiently in the 1960s. He observed, "Ships we were told were emergency trash, barely seaworthy, outlasted our finest U-boats by decades. It was the final insult. Their throwaway ships were better than our best submarines." In February 1943, a remarkable document was circulated among U-boat flotilla commanders. Authored by an anonymous staff officer, later identified as Korvettenkapitän Hans Rudolf Rösing, it presented a mathematical analysis that proved prophetic. Current American production, 1 million tons monthly and increasing current sinking rate, 400,000 tons monthly and decreasing net Allied gain, 600,000 tons monthly. At these rates, by December 1943, Allies will have replaced all losses since 1939. By December 1944, Allied merchant fleet will exceed pre-war tonnage by 100%. By December 1945, Allies will possess twice the world's 1939 merchant capacity. Conclusion: the tonnage war is not being lost. It is already lost. Mathematics do not lie. The document was suppressed by Dönitz's headquarters, but copies survived. Every prediction proved conservative. The Allies actually exceeded these projections. Kapitan-Leutnant Peter Cremer, nicknamed Ali, commander of U-333, provided perhaps the most eloquent summary of the U-boat force's recognition of American industrial might. In his post-war memoir, he wrote, "We had been told America was a mongrel nation of jazz musicians and Hollywood cowboys, incapable of serious warfare. Then we learned they were building ships faster than we could count them, let alone sink them. Each Liberty ship was a 7,000-ton testimony to our leaders' delusions. I remember the exact moment I knew we had lost. It was March 1943. I had just sunk a freighter, a clean kill, when my watch officer called me to the periscope. On the horizon he had spotted another convoy, 40 ships, all new, all American-built, all heading for Britain. I had 2 torpedoes left, 2 torpedoes against 40 ships. That was the mathematics of our defeat. We were U-boat men, elite warriors of the Kriegsmarine. We thought courage and skill would triumph over numbers. But you cannot torpedo a production statistic. You cannot sink an assembly line with valor. The Americans had weaponized their entire industrial base, and we were hunting their output with submarines. It was like attacking a thunderstorm with a sword, heroic perhaps, but ultimately futile. At the Nuremberg trials, Dönitz was questioned extensively about his continuation of the U-boat war, despite knowing about American production supremacy. His answer, recorded in the trial transcripts, remains one of the most revealing admissions of the war. By early 1943, I knew from intelligence reports that the Americans were building approximately 140 ships monthly, while we were sinking fewer than 40. Simple arithmetic showed we were losing the tonnage war by a factor of 3 to 1, and the ratio was worsening each month. But what alternative did we have? Surrender the Atlantic without a fight? Allow the Allies to build their invasion fleets unmolested? We continued not because we could win, but because we could force the enemy to devote resources to convoy protection, to building yet more ships, to maintaining the vast anti-submarine apparatus. The tragedy was not that we lost the tonnage war. That was inevitable once America entered the conflict. The tragedy was that we ever believed we could win it. We challenged the world's greatest industrial power to a production contest. The result was preordained. By war's end, the statistics were so overwhelming that many U-boat veterans initially refused to believe them. At a prisoner-of-war camp in Louisiana, captured U-boat officers were shown a film about American shipbuilding. The film claimed that at its peak, the American shipbuilding machine could produce the entire pre-war commercial shipping tonnage in just 3 years. Kapitan-Leutnant Johann Mohr stood up and declared it propaganda, impossible, a lie. The American camp commander responded by arranging a tour of the Houston ship channel. The German officers were shown dozens of Liberty ships under construction, thousands of workers welding and assembling, and complete vessels sliding down the ways daily. Mohr later wrote, "We stood there, 30 U-boat officers, watching them build more tonnage in a morning than our best patrol had ever sunk. Some men wept, others laughed, the bitter laugh of men who finally understand a terrible joke. We had been trying to drain the ocean while the Americans were refilling it with a fire hose." The story of German U-boat commanders recognizing American shipbuilding supremacy is more than a tale of industrial triumph. It represents the moment when modern warfare shifted from tactical skill to production capacity, from individual heroism to systemic output. Fregattenkapitän Reinhard Suren, who had commanded U-564 with distinction, provided the most prescient analysis in a 1960 interview. "We learned too late that in modern war, courage and skill matter less than conveyor belts and welding torches. The Americans didn't defeat our U-boats with better ships or superior tactics. They defeated us with superior mathematics. They understood that war had become an equation, and they simply produced more solutions than we could generate problems." The psychological journey of U-boat commanders, from confidence through disbelief to despair, mirrors the broader German military experience. They had prepared for tactical warfare and encountered industrial warfare. They had trained to fight ships and found themselves fighting factories. Decades after the war, German naval officers still struggled with the magnitude of American industrial achievement. At a 1985 reunion of U-boat veterans in Kiel, the keynote speaker, former Korvettenkapitän Erich Topp, addressed the assembled survivors. "Gentlemen, we were the finest submarine force ever assembled. Our training was superb, our boats were excellent, our tactics were revolutionary. We sank millions of tons of shipping and came close to starving Britain. But we were defeated by something we never understood and could never counter: the American ability to turn their entire nation into a weapon." Every American housewife who bought war bonds, every teenager who worked a shipyard shift, every farmer who grew food for industrial workers, they were all weapons in a war we didn't know how to fight. We sank their ships. They built more. We sank those. They built even more. It wasn't a battle. It was an avalanche. Let us honor our fallen comrades not by pretending we could have won, but by acknowledging the truth. We were warriors from an old world, fighting an enemy who had invented a new one. They didn't defeat us with better submarines or superior seamanship. They defeated us with liberty ships, ugly, slow, mass-produced symbols of a democracy that could transform its entire society into an arsenal. That is the lesson we must pass on. In modern war, the factory floor is as important as the battlefield, the production line as crucial as the front line. We learned this through our periscopes, watching endless convoys of new American ships steaming toward horizons we could no longer reach. The war's end brought final tallies that confirmed what U-boat commanders had realized by 1943. Germany needed to sink 700,000 tons monthly to win the tonnage war after the US entered, but achieved this only once, in November 1942. By contrast, American shipyards were producing over 1.5 million tons monthly by 1943. The human cost of this mathematical defeat was staggering. Of 40,000 men who served in U-boats, 30,000 died, a 75% casualty rate, the highest of any service branch in any nation during World War II. They had fought magnificently for a strategy that mathematics had doomed from the start. Admiral Karl Dönitz, writing in his memoirs years after the war, provided the epitaph for the tonnage war. "We calculated that sinking sufficient tonnage monthly would defeat Britain. We didn't calculate that America could build 2 million tons monthly. That was not a miscalculation. It was a failure of imagination. We could not imagine such industrial power because we had never seen it. By the time we could see it, through our periscopes and in our intelligence reports, it was too late. The war was over. We simply continued fighting for 2 more years before admitting it. Today, only 2 operational Liberty ships remain from the 2,710 built. The SS John W. Brown and the SS Jeremiah O'Brien, both preserved as memorial ships. They stand as monuments not to naval architecture, but to industrial achievement, reminders of when America transformed itself into what President Franklin Roosevelt called the arsenal of democracy. For the German U-boat force, these ships represent something else, the physical manifestation of mathematical defeat. Every rivet, every weld, every ton of cargo capacity was a number in an equation they could never balance. They had gone to war believing in the superiority of German engineering, the excellence of their training, the inevitability of their victory. They discovered instead that wars could be won in shipyards, that victory could be welded together by workers who had never seen the ocean. The story of U-boat commanders realizing America built ships faster than they could sink them is ultimately a story about the transformation of warfare itself. It marks the moment when industrial capacity became more important than military skill, when production lines became more decisive than front lines, when the ability to build became more powerful than the ability to destroy. In the end, the German U-boat force was not defeated by superior Allied naval forces, better tactics, or more courageous sailors. They were defeated by 2,710 Liberty ships built between 1941 and 1945, each one a 7,000-ton proof that in modern warfare, mathematics matters more than martial prowess, and the nation that can build the most the fastest will ultimately prevail. The U-boat commanders who survived the war carried this knowledge with them for the rest of their lives. The terrible understanding that they had been magnificent warriors in the wrong kind of war, fighting with submarines against spreadsheets, attacking with torpedoes an enemy armed with assembly lines. They had sought to win a tonnage war and discovered, too late, that their enemy had redefined what tonnage meant. Their story stands as a warning and a lesson. In the age of industrial warfare, courage and skill remain important, but they are no match for overwhelming productive capacity. The U-boats of the Kriegsmarine were among the finest weapons ever created, manned by some of the bravest and most skilled warriors in history. But they were ultimately defeated by something as mundane as production statistics, as unglamorous as welding torches, as simple as the ability to build ships faster than they could be sunk. That is the final lesson of the tonnage war. In modern conflict, victory belongs not to the brave, but to the productive, not to the skilled, but to the systematic, not to those who can destroy, but to those who can build. The German U-boat commanders learned this lesson through their periscopes, watching endless streams of new American ships sailing past, each one a mathematical proof of their inevitable defeat.